Welcome back to Introducing Virginia Mysteries. I'm Andrew Wood. This is episode number 6, Dirt Unearthed. This episode, we will be looking at Heidi Christopher's debut psychological thriller, Lies the Dirt Keeps. And we interviewed Miss Christopher herself, and we got some other experts to weigh in on subjects and topics in the book. This episode will include spoilers to Christopher's book, and it also will contain some adult topics, so please be mindful. Here are Libby and Febronia with their opening discussion.
Can you tell me about the book Lies the Dirt Keeps by Heidi Christopher, and also tell me a little bit about Heidi Christopher herself?
Absolutely, I can. So, Lies the Dirt Keeps is a story about a girl named Jonna who has kind of moved away from her family in North Carolina, has moved to Virginia, has tried to make a living for herself, right? And the reader doesn't really understand why we're there at first, but we go along with it. It's it's a first person point of view from Jonna's point of view, so we get every interaction from her. So we're just like, okay, we're along for the journey, right? We learn throughout the story that her sister Ori has gone missing, her little sister, and so she has to go back to North Carolina to try to figure out what's happened to her. And the town of Sweetwater, North Carolina doesn't really seem to appreciate the fact that she's back, which is kind of a weird thing.
Wow.
And thanks, guys. I'm just trying to find my sister, cheese.
Gosh.
She's just trying to figure out, what's, why does everybody hate me here? What's going on? Why do they want me to go back type of situation? We're trying to figure that out too. What exactly, it's a small town. Again, people know things that they're, everything about each other. So, it's like, what do they know that we don't right now? We got to figure that out. So throughout the story, she, tries to talk with her mother, who they have a kind of not very good relationship. We'll just say it's very strained. Her mother doesn't really want her there either. It's just kind of hard to read and to think about. And then, she has her little brother, and he's just kind of distant. He's like, what are you doing? Go back. She's probably just, run away and she'll be back soon. She's done it before type of thing. But she feels like, there's something going on. She gets these visions, where she feels like her sister is talking to her and be like, no, there's more to the story here. I'm not just missing. So we have to go through that with Jonna and try to figure out what's going on. We learned that she was abused by her stepfather, unfortunately, sexually abused mentally as well. So it was a very, rough time for her in childhood, and she turned to drugs pretty early in her life because of that. So you try to escape from her, her reality. Her mother also physically abuses her throughout the story. So as we can imagine, it's not a very happy place that she left, and Ori probably knew that as well. Her little sister, a lot of people they were like, she just ran away, tough childhood, right? So she's trying to figure that out. And big spoiler alert. Big. We find out that Jonna is the one that kills Ori. Dun dun dun.
What?
It's crazy. I'll kind of tell. I'll tell it now. Yeah, why not? So she's driving with her brother after, she's kind of killed everybody in the town. She's killed her ex-boyfriend who was trying to cover up for her. I don't know why. I wouldn't cover up for an ex personally, but
that's
it was crazy. She thinks it was him that killed his her sister, and so she goes kills that guy. So she's just driving along with her little brother, because she thinks it's all done and over with. She thinks she's figured out who it is, and she rolls down the window because she starts kind of feeling nauseous, and she hears this little click 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 type of thing, and she thinks it's like a piece of gravel in a tire. She's like, pull over, I can't listen to that, I need to get that out right away, right? So brother pulls over, and she's trying to find it, and she can't figure out what it is, and then she finally sees a little white stone type of thing in the tire, and she's like, that's what it is. And she pulls it out, and she's like, oh, that's not a stone, that's a tooth. How lovely. So she's like, oh my god, Ori must have gotten hit by this, because she knew that when she found Ori's body in the freezer that her ex kind of banged her on, by the way. She's like, oh, she got hit by a car type of situation. And then she's like, oh shoot, she got hit by this car, my brother's truck. And so she's thinking her brother's the one that killed their sister. It's a whole psychological warfare game, man. Like, I don't know. Like, the reader doesn't know what the heck's going on at this point. It's just all being thrown at them. And same thing for Jonna. That's how she feels, and that's how we feel. So, you know, the brother kind of makes her realize, no, Jonna, you're the one that was driving the truck that night. You killed Ori. It's a whole psychological game. But, you know, the click, it's a very, like, this book is very, I think, reminiscent of Poe and his vibe. I think out of all the books that I've read, and maybe even out of all the books that we've done for this project in general, it's very spooky. It's very, what's going on here? The narrator's the only point of view you're getting, so you're trying to figure it out with that character. So, it, like, that click. Poe's a very audio, he loves the sound. He loves to give sound throughout his short stories and his poems. It's one of his strong suits. Well, he's got many, don't get me wrong, but like I think that's one of the very memorable things to me. And so I immediately connected that, you know, with Telltale Heart, because you hear, you know, the beating of the old man's heart, even though the police can't hear it. You know what I mean? They're just like, oh, this is fine and dandy. He must have done that. He's just gone, you know. But somehow the guy convinces himself because he can hear it, they can hear it. So it's kind of that same situation where Jonna can hear the tooth rolling in the tire. You know, it's kind of the truth coming out in a way. It's her sister being like, hey, you actually killed me, by the way. So I thought that was a very shocking moment, you know, and it's a very big Poe connection, tie. And, you know, I kind of leaned into that very spooky vibe very much so. We have that intergenerational trauma again. You know, I mean, I already kind of talked about with her stepfather and her mother. It's not a very great, you know, situation. Her sister is obviously dead because of the bonds that didn't happen. You know, like, Jonna feels bad because she feels like she should have been the big sister that protected her from that trauma that was happening.
And then she killed her.
Even though she, you know, killed her, ran away, you know, in the end, you know, so it's kind of all that stuff that happens, and it's very sad. And you have that psychological aspect to it as well, where, I mean, if something so terrible had happened to you, I mean, how would you react? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, things can trigger people very much so, and it's hard to, you know, maybe like her sister was graduating that night when she killed her, so maybe the triggering event of Ori graduating and being successful, and Ori being, you know, praised for her accomplishments type of thing, because her mother didn't treat Ori like that at all, and Ori didn't get sexually assaulted by her stepfather Barrett like Jonna did. Jonna took those blows for her, being the big sister that she is. So I mean, that a lot of those that can take a toll on a person, you know what I mean? So I really leaned into that psychological aspect as well. And then for the setting, it was a little different for this book because we are in Virginia in, like, the first chapter, and then that's about it, right? We're in North Carolina the rest of the time. And I kind of tried to, like, I think when Jonna leaves, right, she tries to get out of her predicament, and she leaves for Virginia, she becomes a photographer, all these things, right? She's trying to escape. She's trying to escape her reality, and she does that through drugs as well. But I think the biggest thing was that move. She needed to get out, and so I think that can say something about Virginia, where it can be an escape for those who need it. If you know, come for, you know, comfort, I think you can find that here. You know, she had built a life for herself there. She had her photos were being published. She had an art gallery thing that night, but, you know, she got the call that her sister had disappeared, so she up and left to go find her. I mean, she had an ex-girlfriend, I think, at the time, technically, but she was starting to get away from, you know, the trauma that she had. So I think that kind of reflects Virginia in more positive light. And then, yeah, just being able to have that choice to leave, I think, was really empowering for her as well. So I think Virginia, point for Virginia there. But yeah,
I didn't hear much about Heidi Christopher. Do you have anything you would want to share from her?
Oh my God, my dear Heidi Christopher, thank you. I wanted to save her because she's a very cool lady. we got to interview her, and she's a very cool person. She's also got like a bunch of like Poe memorabilia around her house. Like she's got a ton of stuff. So she loves Poe, and she talked to me a bit about that. But she also, I can't remember, was she also born in North Carolina? I can't remember where she came from. I believe she's from North Carolina, and then she also moved to Virginia. So that was kind of, like it was a very life to paper almost type of thing. She a lot of her experiences she was able to put into this book as well. So I think that also was something that she drew from a lot, was her life. And then she's also a big mental health advocate. Like she talked to me a lot about that, and it really reflects in the book, because you see like she doesn't care. Like I remember in the book or in the interview, she said, "I don't care whether the reader likes Jonna or not. That doesn't matter. That's beside the point. What we should be looking at is her trauma, how she handled it, and how like some people might not like understand that trauma, and that's okay. But they need to try to understand it. We might not be able to know it from our own lives, but we need to be able to think about them, their situation. How can we, like sometimes it's just you gotta step back and figure out whether you love them and you try to stay with them and help them figure it out, or is like, girl, sorry, that's just not my cup of tea, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to step back and not get ourselves involved in sometimes toxic situations, because a lot of people experience that today. They have toxic people in their lives, and you have to either you're out.
Oh.
Or so don't kill them. But maybe just try to get them out of your life, or try to work on it with them. So I think she really puts that in a great light, where she understands that things happen, unfortunately, and you have to try to work past them. And I think Jonna really does try to work past it in the end. Yeah, she just got a whole crap ton of things dumped on her, but it's you can tell she still has hope in the end. So I think that's kind of what Heidi tries to promote a lot, is that sense of hope, that sense of you can still work on this, you can still fix this. So yeah.
We'll get to speak with the author, Heidi Christopher, in just a moment. The story about this episode's cover: when the IVM crew were on our field trip to UVA, we really enjoyed perusing through all the materials that the Special Collections Library had to offer us. And a lot of them included letters written by Poe, written by associates of Poe, friends, enemies, family members. But this was a pretty innocuous little money slip that Poe had signed. But out of all of the materials that we read, Poe's penmanship was by far the best. And we thought just kind of the elegance and artistry of his signature was really beautiful. So we thought it apt to include here. But we'll hear from Miss Christopher here in this interview, and then we'll have another interview with my dad again later on. So here is Libby and Heidi.
Our first question, please tell us about how you became a writer, and have you always wanted to share stories?
I started writing when I was very young. Just little sentence stories about whatever critter I would see in the corner of my bedroom. And I won a prize in third grade for why it's important for kids to get medical treatment when they're little, just stuff like that. But as I got older and became a mom very young, I found writing again during whatever quiet times I could find, and then it just kind of just took off after that. Just kind of been my whole life.
I'd like to hear that. That's awesome. Next question for you. Did any authors in particular inspire you toward your own interest in writing? And would you happen to have a favorite Edgar Allan Poe story or poem? And if so, why do you find it so compelling?
Some of the first like full-length novels that I read um, were from Stephen King. When I was like because my older sister read, she introduced me to Edgar Allan Poe. So I was 5 years younger than her. She's in high school reading me bedtime stories of Edgar Allan Poe, and so as I got older and the library expanded from elementary school to middle school to high school, I was able to start reading, more into that specific dark literature. And yeah, and from Edgar Allan Poe to Flannery O'Connor to Toni Morrison, like just I've always been drawn to that literature, that kind of the Southern Gothic grit. I mean, as I mentioned in the the symposium that we did, I grew up in very hot South, rural, poor, so I guess just living that kind of life also probably piqued my interest in that genre of literature.
Lovely. Alrighty. My next question for you. Your debut novel, Lies the Dirt Keeps, is an unforgettable psychological thriller. It also aligns with traditions of Southern Gothic literature. Would you consider yourself a fan of Southern Gothic literature?
Oh yeah, like 100%, of course.
Kind of weird. That's good to know. Alrighty. Next one. The unreliable perspectives and narration of John LaGrange, your protagonist, obviously contribute to the stunning twists and turns of the story. Did you always plan to use unreliable narration in this book? And what would you say are the benefits and challenges of using unreliable narration to present a story like this?
The first draft of this story was written from the perspective of the ghost, of the dead sister. So my main character was going to be the dead sister. During about draft 3 is when I flipped everything to kind of where it is now. Things were a little different. It was still a lot more paranormal, as in there was like possession elements. Because the way I wanted to present the story was, at first it was, just the big idea of the family covering up her own murder. And then when I decided to, make Jonna LaGrange like the living character investigating what has happened to her sister, I didn't want it to be, I wanted her to be questioning things too. Like, why is everyone mad that I'm here? Like, this doesn't make sense. What's, just the constant questioning. I'm a big fan of unreliable narrators anyway. It's just kind of been, I think one of the first introductions to unreliable narrator was Nick from The Great Gatsby. And I think I hated it so much that I was like, I want to do that, but like the way I would like it as a reader. And then of course, Gillian Flynn and Paula Hawkins, like those authors can really write an unreliable narrator very well. So I wanted to try and do that. And it was very difficult, but it was fun.
I can imagine. I think you succeeded quite well. I mean, as I was reading the book, it was just, as I said, so many twists and turns, and I like to pride myself in being able to predict what's coming next, and I could not. So very hats off to you. My next question for you. The unreliable narration in Lies the Dirt Keeps, in many ways, could be a result of Jonna's drug use. Could you tell us a little more about how she uses drugs to escape her trauma and the domestic violence she endures?
So, because of some of the other questions, like I'm a mental health advocate. I have my own mental health, struggles, and I don't necessarily feel like her drug use is as much as an escape now for her as it was when she was younger. Kind of the same way that you would take like a pain pill for like a broken arm. Like similarly, she's trying to dose herself so she doesn't feel the mental anguish, but she's definitely not, I think the drug use is the misuse of it. Like, you're prescribed these medications and you can take the prescription as the doctor said, or you can say, oh, I'm going to take another pill or two. She definitely does that to kind of, I guess, just slip away and forget about things. Cause like, as you read the book, it's a very traumatic story. It's not a lot of happiness going on around there. So,
Nope,
yeah.
not sunshine and rainbows. I can confirm that one. But that makes sense. That makes sense. My next question for you. The setting changes in Lies the Dirt Keeps also signifies Jonna's efforts to escape her family situation. Could you tell us a little more about your decision to have Jonna flee to Virginia rather than to somewhere else in North Carolina, for instance? And what would you like readers to take away from the contrasting settings of your story?
So I think that that's a neat question that as a reader that you thought of, because that was just from like experiences. I live in Virginia. I used to live in North Carolina. Where's a good place for her to live? In the DC area. It's a big city. Like, she's a photographer. She's more likely to become successful there. It was just kind of like a logical decision, not so much like I didn't feel like anybody would really care about that.
Oopsie.
That's cool though.
Yeah, no. I think that's the fun thing about your books. People can find so many little hidden like things that other people just wouldn't think of. So I really appreciate that aspect. Jonna's interest, you actually brought it up, in photographing dead things such as roadkill, dying plants, and dilapidated rural structures is quite fascinating. And we can see that aptitude resonates in the snapshot or pictorial ways that Jonna describes the places she visits and where she stays in Sweetwater. Did you always know this would be Jonna's career choice? And did you ever consider any other career options for Jonna? And is photography one of your own interests or hobbies? I threw a lot at you.
So when I first, started drafting this story, she was actually like younger, and she was like in nursing school. That's also like a reference of like my experience. Oh, because I did go to nursing school at a young age, and then I was like, I don't like during the redrafting and stuff. I have been interested in photography. I don't take good pictures, but I love to look at like beautiful pictures. So, well, in a sense of like her being fascinated with roadkill, for the story's purpose, I wanted that specific I wanted that hobby of hers, because she mentions it, in the story, that when she was even younger, she liked to like flip over the roadkill to see like what was on the bottom. Like, that's the grossest part. Just let's see what it is, right? Yeah. When you grow up in the country, on back roads, you see a lot of dead animals, and you walk a lot or you ride your bike a lot. I did. That was my experience growing up. So I saw a lot of roadkill and was very curious and fascinated with it. And if I'd had a camera on me, I probably would have taken pictures of that. But I think there's a kind of a beauty in it, in a sense of not the grotesqueness of it, but just like that's nature. It's like how you live, you die. Like, it's all gonna like buildings. They're beautiful. They're brand new at one point, and then 100 years later, the barn is like falling apart, right? So, I just thought it would be just something kind of to imitate her as the character. Kind of like, not only is that her job, but it's like a reflection of kind of like her mental and like the happenings around her, dealing with her family and things like that, her past.
Yeah, it comes through. Absolutely. Your vivid visual appeals in the story are certainly memorable, but you also include, especially toward the end of the story, some vivid audio appeals. So how did you come up with these sound appeal ideas for your story? And I'm specifically keeping in mind the tooth and the tire moment. And did you have any post stories in mind when you conceived these sound appeals?
I did not have Poe in mind. So I love tires crunching over gravel. Gosh. And when you like go, and probably you guys too, you live around here and drive around here, there's a lot of gravel roads. So, and we always had old cars, so there was no AC. So you always had your windows down, you could hear it. And when you hit pavement, if gravel was stuck in your tire, you would hear it, and it would click, 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 click. And that was so annoying. I did not like that sound. So that was something I was like, I want to try to figure out like what body part would get stuck in a tire and make that sound. And it was a tooth, but I really tried to find something different, because I didn't want it to be a tooth. I wanted so badly to find another part of Ori's body that could have gotten lodged in that tire and not be a tooth, but nothing made sense except for a tooth. You know, it's perfect gravel size. And so that's kind of like, I knew that as soon as I put that together, that's what the reveal was going to be, for her to find that, to know that, wait a minute, there's a tooth in your tire truck, and to think that her brother did it, you know, oh my God. And now she's getting back in the car with him. Like, you know, that build up there. But I really tried not to use a tooth, but when it came down to it, I was like, it's the only thing that really makes sense. So
can I ask, why didn't you want it to be a tooth in the tire, just out of curiosity?
There was such a big, with Gillian Flynn's Sharp Objects, that was like the huge reveal, was that tooth floor that she built in that dollhouse. I just was like, it was so shocking to me that I was like, wow, there's no way that's not memorable to everyone who's read her book or watched the show. Like, they're going to recognize, hey, that was a tooth too. So I so didn't want that. Like, I didn't want to like feel like I was copying something, but I really was like, maybe I am, because that's the best that I can give it. But like, that's what it ended up being. So that's what it is.
No, I think it's certainly memorable in its own right. So I think you did it justice.
Well, thank you.
You mentioned, like you said on here and on social media, that you are a mental health advocate. Despite Jana's disastrous deeds, you have made her a sympathetic and compelling character to readers. Did you have specific takeaways that you'd like readers to consider when they get to know Jana and learn more about her experiences?
I think it's just kind of advice for everybody. Just, you never know what people are going through. You never know, like, why somebody kind of sped past you or rushed out the door and bumped your shoulder, or, you know, or didn't respond back to you when you were like, oh, hey, how, you know, being friendly, you know, just, you never know what people are going through. And if it's not something that you can visually see on someone, you know, you can't, you know, see an inside struggle versus, oh, you have a broken leg, or, you know, or you're pregnant and it's hot outside, you know, or, you know, just something like visually a visual cue to show someone suffering versus the invisible suffering that we all experience as humans on this planet. And if people, I don't care if people like her as a character or not. That was just, for me, it was just, I wanted to show how mental illness can be so completely covered and masked that unless you were inside their head, you wouldn't know, you know, you're just like, oh, they like popping pills, or, oh, they drink, or, you know, anybody who's had an alcoholic in the family can understand, like, you know, how you have to either learn to love them because you do love them because you're family, or you have to say, hey, you're toxic, and you push them away. So I guess that's kind of what I would want readers to do. You either sympathize or empathize with her, or you're like, she's a bitch and she killed her sister and she needs to go to jail.
I like that answer very much. Thank you. And my next question for you. In our IVM project research, we're noticing that intergenerational trauma throughout the books is a theme in multiple novels of our study. What would you like readers to consider about the potentially paralyzing aspects of intergenerational trauma? And I know that your book certainly engages with ideas of repression and repressed memories. The title, of course, emphasizes the power of memory. And is there anything that you'd like readers to learn or consider about the power of memory when they read your book?
I feel like there's been so much discussion around generational trauma, that the younger generations are able to identify it now, like even way before our parents could, and see that that's what it is. They're able to get, you know, treatment at younger ages and stop the cycle of whatever it happens to be, whatever it is. You know, there's so many more facets to generational trauma other than drug addiction and being poor. I mean, there's so many things. So, you know, just as it's all about, it's, for me, if I hope that people who do find this book and want to look into it more than just an entertaining quick read, that, you know, if they haven't discovered something in themselves, that maybe they will, or a friend, or their, you know, a sibling, whoever, you know, just just trying to bring more, representation to all the aspects of the trauma that people live through.
Very good. Alrighty. My last question for you. Well, there's a couple built in, but my official last question. We all enjoyed reading your debut novel. Do you have any plans for a second story? And will mental health challenges appear in the new story? And could the story take place in or near Virginia?
So I do have another story that I'm finished and waiting to get edits back on it, but everything that I write is going to have mental health rep in it, and I think that every story that I write is going to center around the East Coast. I've lived in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia. So, all of those places mean things to me. They've had, hey, Kitty, he's saying making his debut. Go ahead. So yeah, but my next book is located in a fictional town called Sweetwater, in North Carolina. And it's new adult, so it's not such a jump from YA to adult. It's right there in the middle, like right post graduation, like right after graduation. And it also involves an unreliable narrator and the all the good things that I feel like I like to write about. It's more of a whodunit as far as like the main character's not the killer. Just go ahead and tell you that.
Darn it.
You can't keep making the siblings kill each other.
Same disclaimer as in episode 4. This interview I recorded with my dad happened next to a lake, so there are going to be some background lake sounds, and we hope that's not too much of a problem. This discussion with my dad mostly revolved around his part in settling the big opioid case regarding Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, and how that connects to the ideas of drug abuse and other kinds of abuse happening in Heidi's book. So we hope you enjoy. What was your role in combating the opioid epidemic?
Single-handedly combated and defeated. No. So I mean, most directly, when I was the first Assistant Attorney General of North Carolina, I led the multi-state negotiating team in negotiating the initial 5 or 6 national opioid or settlements with national opioid distributors and manufacturers. Recovering, 50 billion plus with a B. So
How complicated was that settlement?
it is regarded by most who know and have opined as the most complicated settlement in the history of the American legal system.
Why?
Because there were, every state was involved, every state attorney general, every state health department was involved, in some way, not necessarily as a plaintiff. And thousands and thousands of cities and counties and towns across the country were also plaintiffs. And there were, a dozen core defendants. I mean, it's probably like 20 or 30 even defendants ultimately. But in terms of big, well-resourced defendants, there were 10 or 12. So you put all that together, and that is, if you're going to create a settlement, like, you could just go litigation by litigation, whatever, and it's just a race to the courthouse. Cases move along at their own speed. Random results happen. Sometimes, some cases did go to trial, and pretty mixed bag of results. Like, there were definitely several cases where the defendants won, and the state or the city or county lost and got nothing. But in the midst of that, everybody knew that you can't do that forever. Or what are we going to have? 10,000 trials? So there had to be some kind of resolution. But getting the companies to take it seriously and realize that they needed to put some multiple B's on the table, and then figuring out how to give them like what they would need in order to be willing to do that, which is they would need to know that they weren't gonna then have to go to trial in even a few places. So it really became an effort of kind of like you needed to flip a coin and have it come up heads 9,000 times and not come up tails more than a couple. So that's how hard it was.
So yeah, who were the Sackler family, and how did this lawsuit come to be?
So it's really more, I'll start with the company rather than the family. It's a company called Purdue Pharma. I think it was founded by somebody else, but it ended up getting taken over by a guy whose last name was Sackler, and at some point, maybe at the beginning, I can't remember, his brother got involved also. So there was it Richard and Mortimer? I can't remember the exact names, but they're deceased, the two original brothers. But the company continued to be owned by the family and their heirs afterwards. And some of them not only owned it, but ran it and were like the senior executives and board members. And basically what they did was they came up with an opiate painkiller, which, opiates for centuries have been recognized for their pain reducing characteristics. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was addicted to heroin, among many other famous literary figures. But, they turned it into a business and selling pain pills, basically. They ended up getting some patents. I forget exactly what made it patentable. Originally, I don't know, 70s, maybe, somewhere in there. Don't quote me on that, but Mortimer and his brother, they were good business people, and they figured out ways to make it so you had to come to them, whether it was because of a patented product or whatever. And at some point they began to very aggressively send out salespeople to sell things to doctors. So to basically sell to doctors the idea that they should prescribe these pills for pain. So at some point along the way they kind of came up with, basically they started making decisions about what to market and how to market it and what to market it to doctors for, based not on what was actually medically sound, but what was better for their business. In that way, they're not necessarily different from so many other pharmaceutical companies. And doctors, to me, the untold story of this whole thing is that really the doctors are the ones who screwed up. Problem for them is they didn't have the kind of money that the drug companies and others had, so they were not very appealing, or I don't know if it's a problem for them. It's a good thing for them. Doctors collectively were not seen as a very deep pocket, and plus it's very difficult to bring medical malpractice claims. But at the root, this wouldn't have happened had doctors not been lazy and taken many doctors and taken the word of a sales guy who knows nothing about medicine for what they can and should prescribe for various things, and who happens to take them to play golf a lot and takes them and their family skiing and, blah, blah, blah. Doctors sort of fell for all that, and nobody has really ever held doctors as a group accountable for that, although many individual doctors have gone to jail, for example, for running pill mills and other things like that. But so the most popular, it came to be that the most popular opiate pain medication was the one that Purdue made, OxyContin. And it looks like they hired some consultants from McKinsey and Company and elsewhere who were like, oh yeah, it's great. I mean, this is sort of a cartoon version, but yeah, I mean, what's better than an addictive product to keep people coming back for more? So opioids are by nature very addictive, and there needed to be limits on how much you would take. Like, they can serve a good purpose, usually for acute pain in the first couple days after surgery, but they started being prescribed like for ongoing use, and that just leads to absolute addiction. And then, like a lot of people, when they run, a common pathway is you go crazy, you go to all these pill mills, you go all over the place trying to get more prescriptions because you're addicted to the pain medicine. And then when you get cut off because the doctors are finally like, no, you've had too much, you turn to heroin or other street versions of pain medication that are laced with fentanyl, for example. So a huge number of people ended up getting addicted. It kept going up and up and up. And a lot of people started dying from overdoses. And that's, I started, Josh got elected in 2016.
Josh Stein.
Josh Stein got elected in 2016. He had run on a platform of making this his number one priority, and so when we started in January of 2017, he said, I want you to make this your number one priority. So that's what, for the 6+ years I was there, it was my number one priority.
So, and how much was the final settlement?
So with the Sacklers and Purdue, it was like $7 billion, somewhere in there. With the deals that I was involved in, well, I mean, I was involved in that deal. I wasn't involved in the very final stages of it over the last year or so after the Supreme Court threw out the original settlement. I was involved in the settlement that ended up getting thrown out by the Supreme Court because of a bankruptcy law kind of issue. And so that one probably got the most news, but it was $7 billion roughly. The other ones, the ones I was involved in, were like collectively $50 billion. So much more than the Purdue settlement. But Purdue was always seen as the center of the worst wrongdoing. There was plenty of wrongdoing to go around, but they were kind of the worst of the worst.
What was the, or what were the intended avenues for the settlement money?
We came up with a big long list of various opioid addiction remediation programs. A guy named Steve Mange, who worked in my office, was instrumental in developing that. And it's attached as an exhibit to all of the settlement agreements. I think it's Exhibit E, maybe? I don't know. I can look it up. But there's an exhibit that sets out all the different ways that the money can be used to treat opioid addiction, basically. So it can be anything from, just providing treatment to people, to creating, the counseling, to distributing treatment medications, to like having a mobile unit that goes around and gives people their treatments, because you have to have regular treatments. Gives it to them in the neighborhood rather than them having to come in to the doctor's office.
Were there any areas in the U.S. that were particularly afflicted and that required special attention?
Well, rural areas generally, Appalachia specifically, but also rural areas of like North Carolina, for example, Maine. And so that kind of went along with my theory that this is really about doctors. It's areas that didn't have as much medical and healthcare infrastructure that ended up being hardest hit. Now, there were some other factors, like being close to I-75 was a factor, going from the west coast of Florida up into the Appalachian states. There were just pill mills all up and down I-75. West Virginia was the single hardest hit state in terms of, by most measures, like a bunch of different statistics, like overdose deaths is probably the most common one, but people undergoing treatment, people who are addicted. Yeah, but West Virginia was probably pretty generally regarded as the hardest hit state. But areas around that, including like North Carolina, the mountains, Virginia, Tennessee, Ohio.
Were there any other correlating factors besides a lack of healthcare infrastructure by being rural?
Being rural, lack of healthcare infrastructure, not much oversight over, not much of like a community of oversight over the doctors. Just kind of poverty.
Lack of communal health awareness.
Yeah.
Education.
Lack of connections. Urban areas tended not to be as hard hit. The fentanyl crisis started to change that a little bit, but this was really a rural phenomenon. Mostly. Disproportionately.
And so, were there avenues made that especially siphoned resources to rural areas as a
in
product
the settlement?
of the settlement?
Yeah, so one thing we did in North Carolina is instead of bringing all the money into Raleigh and having the state government decide how it gets spent, which would inevitably lead to lots of political games and everything like that, we said, even though we're the state, we're going to give almost all the money to the counties. So it just spread the money out much more than otherwise would have been the case.
And, like, in the settlement, there was legal requirements that this money had to go towards something specific
Yeah,
in each county.
yeah. The counties couldn't just spend it on statues and, hot dogs and fixing roads. They had to spend it on an approved list of, well, it was a long list, but it was opioid abatement activities, opioid addiction remediation.
Did you ever observe the opioid crisis contributing to intergenerational trauma?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by intergenerational trauma, but a good friend of mine who actually was one of the lawyers representing one of the defendants, his daughter, who was a collegiate track athlete, got injured, got addicted to pain medication, and then ended up dying while in college from a pill that was laced with fentanyl or something.
So,
and then also, we have friends, you have friends, one person in particular whose brother died of an opioid overdose. I don't know the story of how he originally got addicted, but yeah. And that obviously had a big impact on his parents and on his nephews.
did you ever observe anything where addiction to opioids or the havoc that can wreak on a family or a community, did you ever observe that in some way being passed down generation to generation?
I've heard stories of it. I'm trying to think if I've actually seen it. We worked with a lot of, when I was in the AG's office, in terms of raising public awareness, we worked with a lot of families who had been impacted by it, who had lost children or various other things.
And what progress can you say has definitively been made post-settlement?
Well, one of my just tremendous frustrations was that essentially the same deal that ended up getting finalized in mid-2021, which led to checks starting to go out from the companies to state and local governments around the end of 2021 to fund programs that next year, and then happens every year after that for 15 years. Or 18, I can't even remember. 18 years maybe, at least some of That basic deal was struck in the fall of 2019. It didn't actually get finalized until mid-2021. And the reason it didn't get finalized is because a group of plaintiffs' lawyers who represented some cities and counties, like some big cities and counties, and big groups of cities and counties, did not think that they were being paid enough money in attorney's fees. And so they held up the deal for more than a year and a half to get themselves paid more in attorney's fees. They didn't think that, I forget what it was. Was it $1.6 billion? They didn't think that was enough. So the deal got a little bit better between October, roughly, fall of 2019 and summer of 2021, but almost all of the additional money went to attorney's fees to these guys. And to get back to your other point, almost all guys. And of course, what happened between fall of 2019 and mid-2021? Well, as of the fall of 2019, due to public awareness and some legislative changes, opioid addiction had kind of peaked and was starting to reduce. But what happened in 2020? The pandemic. And what did that cause? That caused just another huge spike in opioid addiction. So while we were fighting about how much money these lawyers were going to get paid, instead of having money going out the door to fund treatment programs right when it was needed the most, it didn't go until a year and a half, 2 years later. And a lot of people died as a result of those lawyers deciding to hold up the deal and fight for more money for themselves. So to me, in many ways, I consider it a tremendous failure, not a success. I mean, I'm happy about the good that it's doing now, but I feel like, I just always wonder if there are things that I could have done that would have made it impossible for them to hold up that deal. I tried really, really hard. I worked incredibly hard. I was with Josh in Cleveland in court, which was the main court that was supervising most of the cases, in a closed session with the judge where he just implored these lawyers to, how important it was for this deal to get done. That was in the fall of 2019. But they held it up. And I hope they're enjoying their private jets.
Many thanks to Heidi Christopher for joining us in this interview. You can find her debut novel, Lies the Dirt Keeps, online and in print. Thanks, of course, to my dad, Swain Wood. It was really just a pleasure to hear the stories of these cases again, because I, of course, remember them happening, and I remember kind of, being peripheral to everything that was going on, but I never was able to really hear everything that happened, like, all the way through. So that was really nice. Thanks, of course, to Libby, Febronia, and Professor Hammond. Next episode, we'll be looking at Dr. Anne Marchant's 2 books, Revenants of the Shenandoah Valley and Wild Virginia. We got to speak with Dr. Marchant herself, and it was really a wonderful interview. You can support us at su.edu/arts/English. I'm Andrew Wood, and I will see you in the next one.